Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn Live. I'm Robert Hannigan. This is BlueVoyant's deep dive into Microsoft security. We're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so exploring the new Defender and Azure Sentinel. BlueVoyant is a global cybersecurity services company. We have many hundreds of MSS clients across 4 continents now. And we use a range of products and partners, but we are a gold partner of Microsoft. And we've seen a real spike in interest amongst our customers and others about what Microsoft is doing in the security space. I think it's genuinely disruptive in a good way and really exciting. And Microsoft are making it very cost effective at the moment, especially if you are already an E5 license holder. And we'll come back to that. But the purpose of the next 40 minutes is really to answer questions from customers. So very quickly, who are we, and some quick introductions. I'm Robert Hannigan. I'm the chairman of BlueVoyant's international division, 20 years in the UK government, and I've been with BlueVoyant for the last 4 years since we founded. And I'm joined by 2 deeply expert colleagues who know more than perhaps anyone on this subject. Between them, I guess they've overseen more deployments into Azure Sentinel. They've consulted with and helped customers really take advantage of Microsoft over the last couple of years, perhaps more than anyone in the industry. They are, first of all, Adrian Grigorof in Canada, who's the CTO of Managed Sentinel. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, Robert. Thank you. And I'm glad to be here and share some of my experience with the community.
Great. Thanks very much. And moving across to Seattle, Micah Heaton, who's BlueVoyant's director for Microsoft Security Solutions. Hi, Micah.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much for that generous introduction. Grateful for an opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with both of you today.
Thanks for joining us so early in the morning, too.
Yeah, no problem.
We're going to go straight into the questions. If you came to the Twitter chat in November, you'll know that we collected a lot of questions from customers and from those who are interested in Microsoft solutions. And we tried to brigade them into the high level through to some specifics. Of course, we can't cover everything, and I'm afraid LinkedIn Live doesn't allow interaction. But you will please have the opportunity to follow up with either Adrian or Micah direct on LinkedIn afterwards. So without further delay, let's go straight into the high-level question, if you like, which is, does Microsoft Defender really cover all cloud security needs? So Micah, maybe you could start by talking us through at the high level, the new Defender ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. I have to give credit to Patrick from Afraid.com who helped put this infographic together. And we like it a lot because we think that if your organization has onboarded into the productivity and collaboration environments in Office 365, that it might be close. You could see the separation of the technology security stack down below. And it's a really comprehensive undertaking from Microsoft's standpoint to protect the identity, data, and device layers. And as an MSSP and managed services organization, we endeavor to cover your endpoints, your security appliances, and really give you kind of a comprehensive 24/7 view of what's happening in your organization. And certainly hand it over to Adrian to give a little bit more context about our strategy there.
Yeah, so we really like how Microsoft is approaching this area. So we imagine the threat landscape as a big battlefield covered with fog. So what we see here is lots of areas where this product can clear that fog of war, so we can see where the enemy is. We will still have areas now and there where you can still not see, but for sure we can see all these dedicated defenders, how they in themselves, they do very highly specialized jobs, identifying very specific threats with teams from Microsoft working day and night just for that particular product. So we like it how the way it goes with this highly specialized soldiers, if you want, can maybe like special forces that they have their own job and allow you to aggregate all the signals into one pane of glass.
Yeah, and my impression, Adrian, is that Microsoft are bringing on new defenders all the time. So this is not a static ecosystem that we've just looked at.
Yeah, so those that work in this field, we are now getting used to opening our computer in the morning and seeing yet another detection, another product that right now it's under scrutiny from Microsoft. And as I said, we have teams that look they're very specialized, understanding the threats for that particular product. And with the cloud, where the complexity is now, it's so increased with very particular products doing very particular jobs, it's very difficult now to cover it all from just some logs. So having these dedicated tools doing their own part, it's great. And you can see here that the Microsoft rebranded these tools. It just shows how the products evolved and how we move from, it just shows the dynamic that happens in the cloud right now, where things change, paradigms change, and we have to have this, let's say, consistent naming convention where we understand now that we have defenders for different particular products that can assist us in controlling threats.
That's a great point, a great graphic, really, because this is much more than a rebranding exercise, isn't it, Micah? I mean, and the question was, I think, from people who are a bit confused about, is this just renaming stuff? It's more than that, isn't it?
It is, certainly. I really like Adrian's analogy, and I'd like to roll with it a little bit more. The fog of war, the opportunity to secure your perimeter. Traditionally, in a security operations team internally would look to put the moat around the castle, and the castle, of course, being the perimeter fencing around our corporate network. And then we would create some kind of a transit or avenue or conduit into that corporate network to give our end users access to intellectual property and assets. Of course, as our workforces have transitioned more and more to a remote sort of circumstance, we'll use the lens that Adrian gave us of the special forces. The Defender stack now is really nicely woven together in a way to provide a kind of symphony of coverage. From an orchestration standpoint, each one of these special forces performs a role and a responsibility in the overall ecosystem. This is a really nice graphic that's gone through several iterations, but Microsoft essentially refers to this as their kill chain. So as data or devices or authentication at the identity layer move in and out of the castle or roaming beyond the perimeter of the corporate environment, you still have these specialized coverages to protect your data at rest, to protect it in transit, and to ensure that everything is really still within the purview of your organization's security operation. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, this does give a really good sense of the totality of the ecosystem and also the organization. I mean, it's sort of bringing some clarity, as Adrian says, to what's otherwise a kind of foggy space. I mean, looking at this, quite a number of our customers have said, do I have to use the whole Defender toolset at once? So talk us through that, Micah.
Yeah, real quick, and then I'll hand the mic over to Adrian to give us a little bit more context. But the answer to that is certainly not. From the lens of being able to take remediation actions within your environment, we really rely on Azure Sentinel as well as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is the next generation antivirus endpoint detection and response capability to allow us to quarantine devices, quarantine files, stop services from running that are making outbound network connections that perhaps shouldn't be. So it is possible to compartmentalize your initiatives. For instance, if you're just moving your identity and authentication initiatives to the cloud from on-prem, maybe you'd like to transition to Azure multi-factor authentication. It's possible for you to counter leverage that technology back to your on-prem environment and inherit the benefits of the cloud side using Defender for Identity. If you've already transitioned your organization to Office 365 or M365 for our enterprise customers, then it's possible that you're leveraging formerly ATP plans 1 and 2 and now Defender for Office in order to create not only mail flow and mail hygiene protections, but also to basically create some governance around the productivity and collaboration layer as far as files move. So no, you don't have to use them all at once, but we really look for an opportunity to provide a single pane of glass as an MSSP, leveraging both Azure Sentinel as well as our proprietary backend technology to dashboard all of these things in a very clean environment so that you can see where your priority initiatives are as it relates to our services offering. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, so definitely, I think the approach here is to go for the priorities. So what's your main priority? These days, the main focus, it's on the endpoint. So it comes natural, for example, to start with Defender ATP or Defender for Endpoints, as it's called now. And then as you master the deployment of this tool, which is very powerful, becoming powerful as the days go by, you naturally see the gaps that you have in visibility. That fog of war becomes evident that, we are still having, for example, what's happening in the cloud, where are our users going, what's the shadow IT. So then, we have the MCAS available. So then you deploy next. Then as you prioritize your resources and your budget, of course, the other tools start to fall into place. We have Defender for Identity that we can deploy in our domain controllers to look for lateral movement and privilege escalation. And then, we have Office Defender for Office that can look for threats in Office 365. So these products, they follow each other, so to speak, naturally. So no, you don't have to then deploy them all at once, but start with the main ones, and the other ones will just follow naturally.
Thanks, Adrian. I mean, I love that point that this gives you visibility of where you haven't got visibility, which is
Exactly.
kind of half the battle, I guess.
You start to know what you don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. That brings us on to the next question, really, which is, what areas do you use Microsoft Security solutions for protection in? And I know the graphic here has a really awesome range of areas. It's quite a busy slide. I don't know who wants to have a first go at this, but I think it's a really nice illustration of just the breadth of Microsoft's offerings. Also, things that Microsoft doesn't do or doesn't do at the moment. Who wants to go first here?
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, so we can see now, and I see from the interaction with the CISOs of the world, how they realize they deploy some of the Microsoft product, and then they see, Microsoft also has coverage for this particular area of my security controls, that I can save maybe cost, I can save on training, have some consistency around the environment, and it all starts to make sense from many points of view. I see some concern around putting all your eggs in one basket, and that's a valid concern. And it used to be back in the day a big deal around using different technologies to kind of like to have different layers of security. But these days, the integration between these products bring much more value than the risk of having one single vendor. So not all of these will be probably perfectly matched, and it's good to have healthy competition among these products. But definitely, we see the value in aggregating on a single platform, and Microsoft is playing with the other vendors very well, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. And we're actually preparing a diagram that we're going to publish with the Microsoft products and all the other alternatives available for them.
I think one of the biggest surprises to me, picking up your point, is people who've been through this process just being amazed at the cost savings. I mean, because Microsoft are essentially throwing a lot of this stuff in for free, as the pane on the left shows, replacing other security vendors with existing E5 licenses. I mean, that's got to be a big attraction for not just simplicity through consolidation, but serious cost savings. Is that your experience, Micah?
I think that's certainly true. Let's just take a moment to unpack this a little bit more. Adrian talked about putting all of our eggs in one basket. And I also agree. I think that is completely fair. What I want to help folks that are just kind of investigating the potential of leveraging the M365 enterprise license, regardless of the size of your organization, understand is that all of these technologies are compartmentalized, and they all have their own redundancies. Essentially, they do work together to form a concert, a unified continuity of experience between one portal from the next. But they are, in fact, separate technologies that have very tightly woven integrations. And on the point of integration, I also want to help folks understand if your organization is deeply, deeply ingrained on another security service, as a solutions agnostic services provider, BlueVoyant really endeavors to help folks understand where the Microsoft value actually starts and stops, as opposed to saying, hey, you need to adopt all of this security technology and implement it all at the same time. That may not actually be true and may not make sense, whereas the cost-benefit analysis bears out that it's better for you to jump into a bundled license relationship with Microsoft as you compartmentalize and accelerate individual adoption tracks on your timeline overall. it might be the case that as an IT director or somebody that is responsible for making procurement decisions for your organization, that you don't have the time, you wear a lot of hats, the resources aren't available to you to put all of these things on a concurrent roadmap. And that's where a trusted advisor can come in and help you make evaluations and determinations. The last point I'll make about integrations is that Microsoft makes it very, very possible for organizations that are deeply ingrained on other security technologies to integrate them with the overall experience. For instance, if you have another mail hygiene or message hygiene provider in your mail records, your MX DNS route to someone else or somewhere else to perform that mail hygiene, it's still possible for you to leverage the Defender for Office technology in order to create safe links or safe attachments and sort of moderate the way that data flows within your organization while still allowing the other providers to do their work. The whole point of Microsoft's API relationships with third-party vendors is to allow them to integrate very cleanly and nicely. So rest assured that it's not a requirement for you to move wholesale to one of these enterprise licenses. But if you're strictly making decisions based on a cost-benefit analysis, there's certainly an incredibly compelling argument to do so.
Yeah, and I think you've both illustrated why a trusted advisor really matters. I mean, just looking at this slide shows there are a lot of decisions to be made, including the eggs, which basket the eggs go in. Can we move on to the next question, which is a kind of deeper focus of the same question, actually, from a company, from somebody, a customer who is really at the coalface of the last few months of the pandemic, dealing with the tidal wave of ransomware attacks and phishing that we've all seen. So how does what we've been talking about, what you've been talking about, protect people, data, and sensitive information systems and infrastructure? Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, certainly. I'll jump in here. The idea is that the whole connective tissue that underpins the entire security stack from Microsoft allows a complete sort of investigation of all of the data and threat signals intelligence that's coming through. So this is a less busy slide than the last one, but really the one I want everybody to really focus on, the circle and star this one, is where it says 8 trillion, 8T, that's trillion threat signals analyzed daily, not weekly, monthly, yearly. That is daily. So the organizations that might be small market, maybe only have a couple hundred users, when they adopt and leverage these technologies, that normalization and baseline of security experience, the ability to detect zero-day attacks, you're getting the same benefit based on the contributions that much larger organizations are making to the overall threat intelligence collection effort that Microsoft's undertaking. So Fortune 500 companies that have adopted some piece of the M365 E5 license or the enterprise mobility and security license stack are making contributions that you as an IT admin or SecOps advisor for your smaller organization, you get to reap the benefits of that. And it is also precisely because, as a provider of operating systems, the identity technology in Azure Active Directory, as well as on-prem Active Directory, and the actual devices in some circumstances with surfaces, for instance. But most importantly, probably beyond identity, is the actual productivity and collaboration environment. Microsoft essentially has all of these things under their purview and has orchestrated the programmatic effort in a way that they're all communicating and talking together. So as soon as you start to understand the ways that those individual pieces are talking, the way that the authentication chains are working together, then you can get a sort of incident response and battle plan put together about how you might respond to the training efforts required to prevent phishing in your environment. And certainly if something does happen, the best place is to go look for incidents of compromise or indicators of compromise, excuse me. And I'm sure that Adrian has a bunch more thoughts on this particular question as well.
Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, so the idea of the graph comes from the fact that we are long past the enterprise data being just a table with the rows and columns. So the data that we deal with these days is much more complex, that it's better represented with a graph. Imagine a tree with branches that has branches within branches and leaves. And so all these, the graph, the Microsoft graph, it's used to capture all this information and be able to gather intelligence from it. And the Microsoft Graph has the security API that deals with integration of various security signals, alerts, threat intelligence. And this API, it's open to any vendor that wants to integrate data into the graph, and not just integrate, but also extract the data. So it's just a win-win situation where all the vendors that work together, providing each, their signals, that together, that's where 1+1, makes 3. And we can build a whole monitoring platform just by interacting with the Microsoft the Graph through the security API. So it's great value in gathering all this intelligence together and providing it to the community. So
I think this is fantastic, Adrian. I agree, and I think this graphic really illustrates it. I spend most of my life on the threat intelligence side, and my background's in signals intelligence and government cyber. And just what is really disruptive for me, as I said at the beginning, is the awesome power of Microsoft's data, bringing that to bear and putting it at the service of any size of company, as you said, Micah. It's an extraordinary contribution, and I think that's what's game changing, even before you get to the technology. So we'll come back to some of that, but if we can move on, I think actually this next question looks to me like customers looking for some light relief, and probably trying to weather storms. Any hot tips? This is not particularly Microsoft, but any hot tips on weathering cybersecurity storms? Micah.
Yeah, so maybe I can.
Adrian, you go.
Yeah, the storm. So my background is in the merchant marine. So we've been through some storms in the ocean, and what we realized that you cannot control the sea. Of course, you cannot control the storms. They're gonna happen. They're gonna hit you. But what you can control is how prepared you are for this. Yeah. How you drill your crew. Do you have everything lined up? Is your equipment working? Do you know what to do when things go bad? So being prepared, that's key point. So go through education, user awareness of your incident response team. You can see in the media when a breach happens, the focus is not whether you've been breached. Yeah, everybody can be breached if somebody's focusing on you, but how you respond to it. Were you prepared? Was it like was due diligence in place? Did you do your best? So if you are prepared and show that, then you're gonna weather the storm much easier.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Adrian. And having been through quite a lot of this in government, having a plan is important. In a pandemic, we're kind of all wishing at the moment that our governments had more plans. But I think having a plan for prevention, and as you say, having a plan for resilience for what happens after the attack. And the only thing I'd add is, over the last 10 years, I've just seen people who are most successful planning now for something beyond looking beyond their network, accepting that their network is actually their supply chain ecosystem, their vendors, realizing that the moat around their organization is not where it all stops. Micah, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, great advice and commentary from both of you. In cybersecurity, we follow a principle called least privilege. You've heard that. The principle is least privilege. So Adrian talked about breaches can happen, probably will happen to a certain extent, but ahead of time, you can mitigate what can be taken from your organization in terms of intellectual property, corporate assets, if you're always endeavoring to follow this principle. And that means that folks inside your organization that perform some kind of administrative capacity only have access to exactly and precisely what they need to have access to. And to take that even a step further, Microsoft has a technology set called Privileged Identity Management, where not only is the access to exactly what you need provided, and only that access, a further function of that is to provide that access only when it's required, so that you can set windows of access control the same way that a safe at a credit union or a bank might be on some kind of timer in order to perform the check-in of funds and the checkout to the courier. It's the same exact concept. And I read an article just about 2 months ago that blew me away, beginning of December, maybe end of November. It was from CoreView Research, indicated that something like 95 to 97% of M365 users are not fully backed behind MFA in some capacity, whether it's Microsoft's Azure MFA or something else. And not to expose that threat surface to everybody that might be listening from a malicious perspective, That's absurd to me. And it even went on to indicate that about 80% or so of admins, that's global admins, security admins, compliance administrators, folks in the organization that wield a lot of access, and what's more, access to the control layers of the organization to provide access to other users, is about 80% adoption of MFA. It's well past time for organizations of any size to figure out how to onboard all their users into some kind of MFA trajectory. And that's really going to help you shore up that you have a job post-breach, knowing that the amount that could be taken from your organization was genuinely limited.
I totally agree. And I read these security articles from experts saying, MFA is vulnerable. And of course, there are ways through it. We all know that. But actually, the one game changer that's really going to raise the bar on security is mass adoption of MFA. And we should stop worrying about the flaws in it before we've even implemented it.
Like Microsoft partners, we have to have MFA. If you don't use MFA, you lose your partner status. That's a kind of a trivia.
Yeah, that's a great point, Adrian. Look, thanks. So we move on to taking a you mentioned IP, Micah and Adrian was talking about data loss. There's a lot of interest in governance and compliance side of what security products can do, and what's the answer on Microsoft? What can Microsoft do? Well, first of all, to protect information, and then secondly, on the compliance and governance side.
So I think there's two angles on this. We have the native controls that have always existed within Office 365 to protect things like social security numbers in a very templatized way. You may not have all the special advanced licensing within your environment to create kind of custom sensitivity types and labels and things of that nature to perform e-discovery searches. But what everyone has at their fingertips with an Office 365 license, regardless of who or where you are, is the ability to templatize encryption at rest and over the wire for generic things like passport numbers, government identification numbers, and things of that nature. Microsoft has widened the net beyond those built-in data leakage prevention controls in Office 365 under a banner that they call Microsoft Information Protection, which includes a whole host of capabilities that are all backed on the Azure Rights Management system. So the idea is that no matter where data is created, the encryption, the classification, the protection can follow the data throughout its life. So the total life cycle of data is basically monitored and followed regardless if it's staying within your organization or not. There's special metadata that is encoded into these file types that enforces the classification and encryption, even if you send data out of your organization to an auditor, to a third-party contractor, or even to some on-prem or cloud-based file repository that's outside OneDrive, SharePoint, OneNote. And that's a magnificent, monumental capability that has really come online and been expanded in the past couple of years. So even if you don't have all the awesome licensing, I would certainly look into this for your organization and just bring your HR department, bring your legal department into a couple of training sessions where you outline 30 to 60 minutes how to actually classify data so that at the end of the day, you don't have a 10-year-old sales drive that nobody knows what's in it and has zero classification. And everybody that's listening to this call just cringed because we all have had that. And we have some obscure drive letter that's just been passed from one IT department to the next. And there's zero classification or real archiving going on that protects you from not only a breach, but auditing. And you might have some requirements from a compliance and governance standpoint legally based on where you're at that you need to be doing this work anyway. So there's not too great of an excuse these days if you have Office 365 because you can start that classification right away. And then I mentioned there were two parts to this. The other side of that is what the managed services opportunity and angle is. If you have a security service provider and you already have these classifications and these protection mechanics from Microsoft Information Protection or Azure Information Protection, Windows Information Protection, or the DLP controls, if any of those things ring a bell because you've already enacted them in your environment, the next step is to start sending those classification alerts over to your SIM solution or your security service or your outsourced security operations center. And I'll give it to Adrian to talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. So one note about data classification service. So Microsoft offers you all the tools available that you can think of, and you have great power with those. But for security practitioners, there's the challenge of actually serving the business people and making them, kind of do a little bit of cultural, education on how to work with the data, with the classification. And we should not forget that security supports the business, not the other way around. So you have all the tools at your disposal to implement the technical controls, but you need the support from senior management to implement this cultural changes throughout the organization. That being said, we can see through all the Microsoft ecosystem around the security controls, how you have the tools to look at the data that comes in and out of your organization, the tools to see what users are sharing outside, right, your premises. And now it's becoming more and more of a reality where users go home, work from home, they interact with the cloud. How do you control what data moves in and out? So that's where tools like MCAS, Defender ATP, they all aggregate the signals and send them to the single pane of glass that it's Sentinel to have a unified view of all this data movement around.
Thanks, Adrian. I think it is a really powerful tool, and say for here in Europe with GDPR, you can see really obvious uses for this and for helping those of us in security keep the general counsel and others of the risk line happy. It's a really clear, powerful tool. We should move on in the interest of time, because I promised we'd stop after 45 minutes. This is a very kind of pandemic-related question where we've suddenly moved faster into the cloud in some companies than planned, and a lot of remote working. So who would like to tackle this? How are we tackling essentially device control and how it fits in? Micah, do you want to go first, or?
Sure, certainly. So I mentioned earlier, a personal pet peeve of mine is MFA not being enabled in the environment. And the reason it's a pet peeve is because the entry floor to creating a zero trust model at the identity and device layer is actually pretty low. And what I mean by that is not that the security isn't comprehensive, it's that the identity and access management tool within the Microsoft cloud stack is called conditional access. And it's actually very easy to use. Maybe you're not the best with the documentation, or maybe you don't want to read, the convoluted nuances that you might see from one blog to the next. But with an Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 license, which is something like a couple of dollars retail per user, it's possible for you to, within 10, 15 minutes, start scaffolding out the framework for a zero trust model for control. And I'll give you just a quick example of this. You don't need to have SCCM enabled on-prem or Intune or Endpoint Manager all fully built out in the cloud in order for you to start putting some limitations around both corporate devices and personal devices. So you might have been put in a circumstance where you have this workforce that's all remote now, and you have several users come to you and say, we'd really like to use our personal laptops. You don't want that to happen. Without putting all of the devices under a management scenario like with Intune or SCCM or some other MDM provider, it's possible for you to use conditional access and within minutes apply a control that prevents the use of unknown devices within your environment, or even more, carouse the use of that device. If you don't want folks on personal devices using the browser-based versions of applications because you can't apply your DLP policies there the way you want, or there's application protection controls that are not available in the browser-based version. For instance, screenshotting, copy and pasting, preventing the syncing of data to a personal device's local storage. Then within 5-10 minutes, you can pick the user out, you can pick the application, you can restrict browser, and you can enforce the use of Microsoft's rich client apps that you'd install on a phone or a computer. And that's really, Robert, why it's a pet peeve. And sometimes I might even be a little bit obnoxious about this in my own webinars and interactions with customers, because I think the entry floor is low enough that you can get going quickly before you figure out the rest of your timeline. And the last point I'll say before I hand it over is, a lot of times we see organizations move Exchange on-prem to Exchange Online or SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online without really considering what the appropriate security posture will be. And then there's a breach, or they just come to an MSSP like BlueVoyant and say, all right, we got everything moved to the cloud, now help us lock it down. When really the reverse should have been the case. Help us define our cloud perimeter and where we can start safely putting our organization's assets. If you have any questions about that or want to prove that out and let me demonstrate that to you in a quick little sync, I'd be happy to have folks reach out and I can show that and demonstrate the quickness and the efficacy of putting conditional access policies in place rapidly. Go ahead,
Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, so I've seen this things evolving through the pandemic, and a few things stand out to me. First, the need for virtualization of everything. So everybody is moving to the cloud, and suddenly we're talking about scalability of all these users interacting with remote systems. And that a single enterprise cannot really offer. So that's why we use third parties, like different SaaS platforms. Day and night, we see new product offerings. And that brings in third-party risk management. How are you going to control all these SaaS platforms spinning up and the business is finding very good reasons to use them? So that's a big part. Then we're talking about encryption. You're now moving from home to internet to your SaaS, to your cloud. Everything has to be encrypted. You're talking about stability of the VPN platforms, the encryption of the endpoint. Where do you do, for example, URL filtering? That's one thing that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint does. It does URL filtering no matter where you are. It's just at the endpoint. So these are the kind of things that I see in the pandemic, and the whole concept of where the enterprise is changes. So the enterprise now, it's the endpoint itself that the user can take anywhere. So we have to secure all the channels that the user has to connect to the business applications.
Well, thanks, Adrian. I mean, I think it was really worth spending some time on this because it is so relevant to the pandemic, and so many companies have rushed into and took some risks, and because they had to, moving to remote working at scale in a week in some cases, and now trying to grapple with what does that look like in steady state. I think that's a really helpful explanation from you and Micah about how the Microsoft suite can help you do that. And please follow up. Take Micah and Adrian's invitation to follow up direct with them on LinkedIn. We should move on. We've only got about 5 minutes left. So this is actually one of the favorite questions in any webinar I've ever been in on cybersecurity, which is how does AI help? And there are a lot of companies, frankly, who market themselves on using AI for cybersecurity, and I'm a bit dubious about it. That's not what we're talking about here, really. We're talking about the use of AI within the Microsoft solutions, I guess. And Adrian, I think you're the expert on this. Do you want to talk about automation?
Yeah, so AI, it's in machine learning in particular. When we're talking about in general about security products, it's everybody's dream of having the machine doing the work for you, save costs, save effort. We've always been affected by the lack of data in this area. So, but these days, so they say your algorithms are as good as your data. Even if you have a mediocre algorithm, feed it enough data, you're gonna get almost the same results. So we're seeing companies like Microsoft now gathering all these large volumes of data that we talked about before, trillions of signals per day, and just to build this the pool of data that we can use to train the machines, right, to identify threats. I see lots of advances in user behavior analytics. So Sentinel has a built-in Defender for Identity. It's using behavior analytics to identify patterns in the user traffic. So big advances there. What we see is that the vendors are no longer saying that, hey, the product is gonna do the job for you, don't worry. Right now, they're emphasizing AI and machine learning as an augmentation to the security analysts. Just, we're gonna bring you the data, put it at your fingertips. We do all the the hard work, tedious work for you, but you eventually take the decision. In time, I can see this becoming more and more, let's say, outsourced to the machine doing some of the tedious tasks. But right now, we still rely on the human doing the tough decisions, while the machine, it's bringing you all the information necessary.
Thanks, Adrian. And I think you make the great point too that this sheer volume of Microsoft's data, the data available to Microsoft, is puts them in a different league from most companies claiming to do machine learning. Okay, we better rush on because we want to stick to time. The next question really is more specific about what are the steps for migrating from current SIEM solution to Azure Sentinel. Well, you've done this, Adrian, lots of times for lots of companies. And do you want to give us a quick overview?
Yeah, so what we see typically, either you have a SIEM that it's overloaded, too much data, too many detection, companies would bring the data without properly analyzing if it really brings value to them and if there is any useful information. So we usually find this overloaded, out of date SIEM systems just being there as legacy. And the companies start to realize, hey, I need a system that is very versatile, that can have visibility to my cloud, that can, is scalable. I can bring it up and down as needed without paying for 5 years of, processing power in advance. So what we do in many cases, they use the SIEMs rather in parallel. We do a, gradual migration of the log sources to the new SIEM. And we usually take all the existing use cases that are deployed in the previous SIEM, and we filter them. We ask the user, okay, which of these use cases, detections, really work for you? And we take those and they migrate into Sentinel. And let's say 90% of them, we already have them in Sentinel.
Okay, that's really helpful. First, and frankly, you are the person to go to if anybody is actually planning to do this, and I know a lot of companies are. So racing on, I've got about 2 more questions. Do I need Sentinel if I have the Defender line of security controls? In other words, do I need both? I think this goes to an earlier point that both of you made about having a single pane of glass. But who wants to have a go at this? A quick answer, if possible.
I can answer. So all of these products, the Microsoft products, they have their own capability to do some orchestration, some reporting. You'll have to navigate between different panels, different dashboards. While with Sentinel, you can bring all the signals together, have a single location where you do all the orchestration around the signals. You can bring logs from on-premises, from a firewall, from your legacy log sources that are not covered by the defenders, and have them all in just one place that you can build very advanced detections on top.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And finally, well, nearly finally, a question which we touched on earlier, which is, what about if our organization still got legacy investments, other cloud platforms, on-prem stuff? How do we protect this as part? So how do we integrate really? Do you want to give a quick answer, Adrian or Micah? Adrian.
Sure. You can see, so, well, it says 55 connectors. There are more now. And we have maybe twice as that we built ourselves. So the data connect, we like to say that if the data exists, we can bring it to Sentinel. Sentinel is very versatile. It has different ways to bring the data in. And it's just a matter of understanding where the logs are, or what are the methods that you can retrieve them. And depending from the type of log source, especially in the cloud, in SaaS, the vendors implement different ways. Could be in a bucket, could be in a blob, could be a script that downloads, or a REST API. Either way, we never had a problem to bring the data into Sentinel. So Sentinel is not cloud only. Sentinel can bring any kind of data in. So
it's very flexible. That is great. Thank you, Adrian. We're going to have one last question, but I might go to you for Micah for this. I mean, it's almost a question that CISOs need an answer for when they're being questioned by the board. Is it irresponsible of a company to outsource their security needs?
Yeah, I love this question because if you spend 20 minutes with Adrian and listen to him talk about log optimization, automating investigations, the potential for leveraging machine learning, not just from a cost optimization standpoint, but from a building out a genuine security posture standpoint, I think the right answer to this question is it is probably irresponsible of an organization not to at least consider outsourcing their security needs and putting the liability and shoulder of responsibility essentially between Microsoft and their platform into the hands of an MSSP that has the accreditation and the experience to do these things well and to do them right. And I think just a short conversation with Adrian almost always bears that out. And it's fascinating to listen to him and his team of data scientists really build out these solutions for customers and the light bulbs just go off and they realize, why didn't I chat with someone like this 12 months ago when we were telling each other this wasn't going to be possible for us in 2020 or 2021? So I think that we really like having actual operational conversations with folks, but I'll just say for myself in closing, we like also having academic conversations with folks that are interested in talking about the technology, or perhaps you're not as technical, but just want to talk about the specific applications of these things in your environment. Reach out to us because we really like nerding out on these things. And I'll reiterate that because we are not just a Microsoft shop, we really want to help your organizations define where the value of applying the Microsoft technology starts and stops. So I'll hand it back to you, Robert. I just want to say thank you to everybody that's followed along with us today and look forward to continued interactions. And hopefully we get a new round of questions and can circle back around to them in a follow-up webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Micah. Actually, I've just had a pinged in one live question, which Adrian's going to have a go at answering, which is, how do you handle breaches through internet provider or software applications installed to the operating system?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So for the breaches, we have to remember incident response, that you are the final owner and responsible for it. The internet provider will be just part of the incident response team. So usually they can have somebody that can provide you with some details, some security controls that it's within their environment that they can. We're talking like DDoS or blocking some traffic. While for the tools on the application level, those are just tools, right? In the end, proper response implies people, processes, and tools. So really, it's a mix of everything, and you have to use the proper tool for the proper part of the incident response lifecycle.
Thanks, Adrian. I hope that answers the question, Tamaka. Great. Look, as Micah said, a few minutes with either of these guys really reminds you of the depth of what is possible. And for me, as a non-expert in MSS, it's a kind of learning experience, and there is an academic side to this too, as well as a very practical side. So please do take them up on this offer of asking their advice, either on details or on big picture stuff. You can get them direct on LinkedIn. But with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much for joining us, all of you. I know there are many, many people in different geographies. Thanks for taking the time. BlueVoyant's here to help you in any of this, as we are many customers around the world. And thanks above all to Adrian and Micah for giving us their expertise. And we'll be doing this again shortly, I hope.
Hey, thanks everyone.